What's up, y'all? Erroneous here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you're having a great day or a great evening wherever you are in the world. What I would love to ask for you is just leave a like on the video now that you're here, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you don't miss another upload from me. I'm going to be going over the rest of the bosses for Grim Forest. That's 5 bosses. Alright, so I'm going to go over all of them and their kits in today's video. So let's get into it. Alright, so I've got the first boss here. We've got Drognall, the Eternal Gatherer. So he is that skeleton looking dude. And what I'll do is I'll try to put some type of picture of each of the bosses next to their actual skills so you can see what each of them look like in game as well. So that's going to be kind of cool to see. Now he is a void boss in the Grim Forest. So it looks really cool though. The avatars are amazing. They knock it out of the park with aesthetics, by the way, all the time. So his A1 attacks all enemies, places a provoke debuff for 2 turns. So be very careful. You're going to want to bring in block debuff champions, support champions. Make sure you're bringing in some shield buff champions or bolster sets. But protection set is going to be one of the strongest, in my opinion, for the Grim Forest. Attacks all enemies, places a decreased attack and a decreased defense for 2 turns on the Osteomancy, which is a 3-turn cooldown, so be very careful. You're going to want to bring in a cleanser or a block debuff champion. On his A3, Spine Frost Howl attacks all enemies, places a freeze debuff for 1 turn. So this guy's got a lot of CC. Steals all turn meter from each target under a freeze. Now, as of right now, it doesn't say that it can't be resisted, so you could bring in champs that have high resistance as well. If you bring in champions that have resistance auras, and then just bring the enough resistance, which we don't know what the resistance thresholds are going to be until we can get people who are big brains and can decode the game and then jot it down for us. So yeah, that'll be interesting to know. But for now, you're going to want to bring in a block debuffer, high res champions. You can bring in champs like Oella who bring in increased resistance against some of these bosses, and you're going to be just fine. Oella also has crazy heals, decreased speed on the boss that she can land, so just keep that in mind. On the passive, whenever Drognall the Eternal Gatherer is attacked, has a 40% chance of placing a freeze debuff on the attacker for 1 turn, decreases the speed of enemies under freeze by 50%. So yeah, you're going to want to resist or definitely block debuff. On another passive, Living Reliquary, Drognall the Eternal Gatherer and his allies are immune to ignore defense effects. So you're going to want to bring in, you might not be able to bring in just heavy hitters then. However, you could potentially still bring in enemy max HP hitters like Marius. However, maybe he's not going to be as effective potentially, but I think he's still going to be decent. I think he's still going to hit the thresholds, to be honest. But you can also bring in HP burners, poisoners, people that explode poisons might be good against this guy. Reflects 50% of the damage that he receives back to the attacker. So you're probably just going to want to bring in a lot of the HP burners and poisoners. Maybe poison exploders would be very strong against this guy. Actually, one guy that comes to mind, let me take a quick peek here. So if we go to the Dark Elves, I think we'll take a trip over here. We look at Noct, and this guy could be very, very strong. So finally, Noct could come into play, where he places protection, ally protection, continuous heals on everybody. He has poisons and sleeps on this ability because clearly this boss is going to have minions because he says the allies are immune to ignore defense, which means you're going to want to bring in someone who can poison this guy down potentially and then maybe just do a one-shot. You know, who knows? Who knows? We don't know yet. Obviously, I'm pretty sure most bosses reduce the poison damage. So I'm going to read through it and see if he reduces poison damage. Like hard mode bosses, they reduce damage from poison on most of them. So yeah, so this guy heals himself by 3% of max HP, and then all allies except this champion by 1% of this champ's max HP every time a poison ticks. So very good for survivability against a boss like this. Whenever an ally is attacked under ally protection, has a chance to place a sleep. Now, of course, it's not going to work on the boss, but it's going to potentially work on the minions if they do attacks. Now, he does have a dungeon aura, but I don't think that these are going to be considered dungeons. So that's the downside. But placing the poison's really nice. And then, you know, placing a sleep on the minions potentially. So poisoners might be strong here. You know, someone like a Xenomorph who you just got for free. This is still going on, the Xenomorph collab with the Predator Badlands. And you can just land the poisons on the boss And then you can place stun and infest. You can do a ton of more damage, 15% more damage for each poison. So this isn't based on ignoring defense. This is just straight up 15% more damage. So someone like Xenomorph can go through that and place poisons. And then whenever he's attacked, 25% chance of placing a 5% poison. And this debuff cannot be resisted or blocked if the attack is critical. And if an enemy is under poison, buff placed by this champion decreases their defense as well by 20%. So Xenomorph could come into this battle as well. Let's go back into his kit here. Almighty immunity. He's immune to stun, free, sleep, fear, true fear, block active skills, pretty much all of these CC abilities, and immune to HP exchange effects, HP balancing, and cooldown increasing. Of course, awakening weakness, you guys know about that. The more awakenings you have on your champions, the less damage they take, and the more damage they'll do to the boss. Almighty strength, damage from skills that scale based on max HP cannot exceed 5% of the boss's max HP. So of course Marius and Newt aren't going to be as powerful, but I'm sure people will find a way. Immune to decreased speed debuffs and turn meter reduction. Okay, so decreased speed won't work on him. That stinks. So I was hoping that you could throw a decreased speed on him, so that goes out the door a little bit. Of course, you want to bring in increased speed champions on your team. You got Razelvarg with the free champion fusion, places increased speed. You got Uko, Mighty Uko, increased speed that you can place without having to worry about reviving. Plenty of champions. Uko is great here because he can also place a decreased attack on his A1. And then damage from HP burn debuffs cannot exceed 1% of the boss's max HP, but it does not say anything about poisons. So keep in mind, poisons are going to be strong against this boss. Let's move on to the next one here. We've got Isheth, the Crimson Siren. Attacks all enemies. She's also a red affinity, not a void affinity like Dragnol. So increases the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn. Instantly activates 1 random continuous heal buff on all allies. So you're going to want to bring in someone that can do heal reduction. Okay, bring in someone who can do heal reduction. That means you want to bring in someone like a Morrigan, who automatically puts heal reduction that's protected, by the way, which is extremely, extremely powerful. There are plenty of other champions that can place the heal reduction, so make sure you're on the lookout for those champions. Leave in the comments down below other champions you have potentially on your account that can do heal reduction. I mean, you could bring in a Coldheart potentially who does heal reduction on the A1. I'm not going to say that she's the strongest for this boss or Grim Forest in general, but she could come in handy for the normal stages if you're just starting to grind the Grim Forest. And then on her A2, Siren's Kiss, places 4 continuous heal buffs on all allies for 3 turns, instantly activates all continuous heal buffs on all allies. So she places 4 and then instantly heals. So that's crazy. You do need to make sure you have heal reduction. She's going to be a crazy support champion for her own minions and herself as well. She's placing it on all allies, which includes herself. So you got to be very careful with her massive heals. On her A3, Doom Aroma attacks all enemies and removes all buffs from all enemies. Places a Master Seal and a block passive skills debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. Master Seal, I haven't seen that ability in a while, but I think that we just got a champion in April who does a Master Seal, if I'm not mistaken. Where are we at, Seal? Okay, 2 types of seals, Seal and Master Seal. The Master Seal is an enhanced version of the Seal, which additionally blocks the effects from blessings except stat boosts. The Seal and Master Seal debuffs don't block effects that were activated before these debuffs were placed. The Seal debuff blocks effects from gear sets and masteries except stat boosts granted by artifacts and accessories. So things like ignore defense, it will block it basically. So that's really strong. As well as masteries that only boost stats like Blade Disciple, Flawless Execution. Okay, so the Seal, Master Seal is not incredibly powerful. It can definitely disrupt you a little bit and cause you to not do as much damage, but I don't think that Master Seal is the most broken thing out there. I think it's strong, but it's not crazy. Now the block passives might be more dangerous than Master Seal. Basically, it's just allowing her to try to survive longer against you and beat you over time. So you're going to want to bring in good champions that have high res, or you can bring in an increased resistance champion or block buffs with the protection sets because you want to protect the block buffs. Now her passive, Unwavering Conceit. The damage inflicted by Isheth, the Crimson Siren, increases by 5% for each buff she is currently under. So you got to be careful because she places 4 continuous heals on herself. So remember, places all these continuous heals. So 4 of them, which means that's a 20% damage increase. So you got to be very, very careful with her damage. Make sure you're cleansing her as much as possible, placing a block buffs. Again, Uko can come in and do that. Mighty Uko, he can cleanse it. So can Marius. Marius has a triple hit cleanse. There's plenty of champs in this game now that have cleanses. And I just went over a video from yesterday that you probably are going to see, hopefully, if you haven't, check it out, about Glaceia Soul Guide, who can remove all buffs from the enemies. So yeah, Glaceia could come into this fight potentially in the future to remove the buffs as well if you need her. When continuous heal buff activates on an ally, Isheth the Crimson Siren's turn meter is increased or fills by 5% and increases her max HP by 5%, and it stacks up to 100%. Wow. So 100% more turn meter and 100% more max HP. That's, you basically need to beat her as quickly as possible. Another one, Giggles of Derision. She and her allies are immune to damage dealt by enemy max HP. Wow. So bringing in Marius, he can strip the buffs, but he's not going to do the damage. So you can't bring in a Marius here, or rather he won't be as effective here. And then allies deal pure damage. You're going to have to bring in CC, crowd control as well. She might be a tough boss to fight because of her allies doing pure damage. Wow. So she's just healing up her allies. She's the support for her allies. And then she allows her allies to do pure damage. Pretty crazy. So she has the exact same immunities as the previous boss and the exact same passive, immune to decreased speed. Damage from HP burn cannot exceed 1% of her max HP. So very strong boss as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Try to help others in terms of what you guys would suggest for champions to bring into the fight. Next one is Maximaz the Weeping Blade, a spirit champion from the Grim Forest. Kind of looks like a Sylvan Watcher, to be honest. Attacks all enemies on the A1. Increase the duration of all debuffs on each target by 1 turn. Okay. Instantly activates 1 poison debuff on each target. So you could end up getting poisoned down unless you're cleansing that poison. Attacks all enemies 2 times. The first hit places a weaken big version and a poison sensitivity big version for 2 turns. The second hit places 3 poison debuffs for 3 turns. Now it doesn't go through block debuffs, so yeah, block debuffs is going to be really, really strong on against all of these bosses, to be fair. But especially this boss and the Drognall boss so far. On the A3, attacks all enemies, increases the cooldowns of all enemies by 1 turn, places a 5% poison debuff on each enemy for 2 turns. So this is a big poisoner, a super big poison champion. And increased cooldown, it's only by 1 turn, but that could be really annoying on a 3-turn cooldown. The number of poison debuffs placed on each enemy is equal to the number of skills currently on cooldown. Yikes, so you could get a crazy stacked up debuff bar on your champions. That's not good. So you want to cleanse, bring in block debuffs, try to make sure you don't get poisons on you as much as possible. You can also try to place a decreased accuracy on this boss so you can increase your resistance thresholds on your champions. Removes all debuffs from Maximaz the Weeping Blade, places a poison cloud buff on himself. Oh wow, okay. He's like a mini Hydra. Interesting. Okay, I do think this is pretty sweet. You know, it's different. It's different because no other boss places poison cloud besides the Hydra. So this is strong. Next, we've got Living Tragedy. Whenever Maximaz the Weeping Blade is attacked, decreases the duration of all buffs on the attacker by 1. If the attack lands a weak hit, decreases the duration of all buffs on the attacker by 2 instead. Fills Maximaz the Weeping Blade's turn meter by 10% whenever he receives a weak hit. So be careful about bringing in red affinity against this boss. Try your best to bring in as much blue affinity as possible. Another passive is called Forever Weeping. Maximize the Weeping Blade and his allies are immune to poison, so you can't poison him. You can HP burn, but you can't poison him. And then enemies under poison debuffs will receive 100% more damage from poison. And then whenever Maximize or his allies are attacked by an enemy under poison, decreases the active skill cooldowns of any allies targeted by that attack by 1 turn. Wow. Dang, that's pretty strong. Also, instantly activates all poison debuffs on the attacker whenever Maximize or his allies are attacked. Dang, yeah, you guys are going to be careful on this one. Shield buffs are your best friend. You could bring in a bolster set on one champion and a shield set on another champion. Stack those shields together for a big shield at the beginning, just in case he places a bunch of poisons or you can't meet the resistance thresholds. So be very careful. All the passives additionally are the same. The Almighty Strength, damage from skills that based on attack. Okay, that's the same. Immune to decreased speed is the same, and Flame Proof is the same. All right, so the next one is Toraz, the Bestial Flame, a magic affinity boss now. Attacks all enemies 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of instantly activating HP burn. If there are no enemies under HP burn, has a 50% chance of decreasing the cooldown of the slash and burn skill by 1 turn instead. So that's this ability on a 4 turn. But if nobody has a HP burn, 50% chance to decrease the cooldown of this by 1. And this is an attack all enemies, places HP burn for 3 turns and block active skills for 2 turns. Dang. Alright, you definitely don't want to get block active skills on you because then you're only doing your A1s. So again, similar to the other bosses, high resistance is going to help, block buffs is going to help, shield sets are going to help, strengthen's going to help. You're going to need some really strong supports here. Inferno Incarnate places a counterattack buff on Toraz the Bestial Flame for 2 turns. Also places a shield buff on Toraz for 2 turns. The value of the shield is equal to 30% of his max HP, and this buff cannot be removed, so you have to do damage through it. Or use champions that can ignore shields. On his passive, Wildfire Soul, whenever Toraz the Bestial Flame is attacked by an enemy under HP burn, extends the duration of that HP burn by 1 turn per hit received. Fills his turn meter by 20% per hit received whenever he is attacked by an enemy without an HP burn. Will not fill Toraz's turn meter if he is also under a freeze. So you can freeze this boss. Interesting. This is one of the only bosses that I've seen that can get frozen. Wait, do these bosses, are they immune to freeze? Okay, this one's immune to freeze. This one's immune to freeze. The rest of the bosses are immune to freeze. So this is the first boss out of this bunch that is not immune to freeze. So you can bring in a frost champion, or a freeze champion rather. You bring in Tormund. You can bring in other champs as well that do freeze. You know, you can bring in a Supreme Aethel that I have on a Void Legendary. I might have some use case for her. And she might actually put in some work against this boss. Surprise, surprise. But yeah, so then his other passive, Vital Spark, he and his allies are immune to HP burn. Enemies under HP burn will receive 100% more damage. Heals all allies by 2% of their max HP whenever an HP burn debuff is activated. So he's constantly healing. Just try to make sure you're cleansing the HP burns. Try to keep the block debuffs. Try to make sure you are having high resistance, high enough resistance, because none of these bosses so far place these debuffs unresistible. So just try to make sure you have a high enough resistance threshold to block them. Everything else is the exact same as the other bosses. And then he's also immune to decreased speed and turn meter reduction. All right, last boss here. Lashun the Entangled one. A Void Affinity boss. I might have to zoom in because there's a lot of information to read here. Blood Branch Bash attacks all enemies. The damage received by targets under Entangle debuff is reduced by 50%. Has a 50% chance of placing a True Fear debuff on targets without an Entangle for 1 turn. Entangle debuff. A champion under Entangle will not receive any positive effects from their allies, including buffs, and will not have their turn meter passively increased. When placed, a champion receiving Entangle debuff will have all of their buffs removed, but can still receive additional debuffs. The Entangle debuff has no duration, and therefore cannot have its duration increased or decreased. The Entangle debuff also cannot be spread to other champions. You can only remove an Entangle debuff by actively filling the champion's turn meter to 100%. That's going to be a challenging one there. So he's basically picking off one of your champions at a time that has an Entangle. So be very, very cautious here. Make sure you're thinking about synergies and strategies when you're going against that Entangle for this boss. On the A2, Gloomwrecker attacks all enemies when before attacking, removes all debuffs from Lashun, and removes all buffs from all enemies. Yikes. The damage inflicted by this skill and the amount of defense ignored against each target increases by 5% for each buff and debuff removed. So he could do a crazy amount of damage to you guys. Whew, that could be a tough one. You know, a champion that could come in here that could help would definitely be Harima, because she could ignore, since he's going to be ignoring defense, she'll cut that in half and it'll be very, very helpful. Thorn Prison on the A3 attacks all enemies under an Entangle debuff, decreases each target's turn meter by 30%. If there are no enemies under an Entangle debuff, attacks the enemy with the highest speed, places a protected Entangle debuff. This debuff cannot be evaded, redirected to another target, or resisted. This debuff will also ignore Stone Skin. Dang, that is crazy. So this boss is going to be not someone to be reckoned with. Then we've got Sublimate Life. Places a protected Entangle on the enemy with the highest speed. Also places a Siphon debuff on the enemy with the highest speed for 3 turns. These debuffs cannot be evaded, redirected to another target, resisted, or blocked. These debuffs will also ignore Stone Skin and Taunt. And the Siphon, champion under Siphon, will have 5% of their stat values siphoned by the debuff producer, except ignore defense. Each time the debuff producer takes a turn, an additional 5% of the stat values will be stolen, stacking up to 50%. For example, a champion with 1000 attack under Siphon will initially have their attack decreased to 950, and the debuff producer's attack will be increased by 5%. Each time the debuff producer takes a turn, an additional 5% of the target stats will be siphoned. The Siphon debuff cannot be transferred, spread, or have its duration increased or decreased. It can be removed, thank God. But don't keep this Siphon on for very long, or else you're going to be screwed. So remove that as quickly as possible. Parasitic Growth on a passive. This guy's got so much in his kit, it's crazy. Whenever a True Fear debuff placed by him is activated, fills the turn meter of him and allies by 10%. It also decreases the duration of all debuffs on him and his allies by 1 turn. At the start of Lashun's turn, deals damage to all enemies under Entangle. The damage dealt is equal to 20% of each target's max HP. Also destroys each target's max HP by 20% of the damage dealt. I think that Marichka is going to be crazy strong against this boss. If an enemy under an Entangle debuff is killed by damage from this skill, places another protected Entangle debuff on the enemy with the next highest speed. Wow. Also places a True Fear debuff on all other enemies without Entangle for 1 turn. Luckily, the True Fear is it can be resisted, it can be blocked. The Entangle can be blocked for the most part. No, it can't. Can't even be blocked or resisted or evaded. So that's the downside. Can you remove the Entangle? You can't remove the Entangle, but you can remove the Siphon. This boss is going to be tricky. This boss is going to be tricky to fight at first, but you'll be able to get it as time goes on. Shouldn't be too long before you start seeing people beat this boss. The passive Elder Tree decreases all incoming damage by 60% if Leshun the Entangled One is not under an HP burn. Also, so you basically want to make sure you're keeping up an HP burn on this guy as much as possible so you can do more damage output against him. Also has a 30% chance of change to change an incoming critical hit into a weak hit if Leshun is not under an HP burn. Yeah, you got to bring an HP burn here. You know who could come into the game here is actually an old but gold champion. Let me go ahead and show you that champion right now. And that champion is in the demon spawn. You can get him very early on. It's Drexthar. Drexthar gets hit. He places an HP burn, booked out to a 60-75% chance. This champion's resistance increases by 10 for every enemy under HP burn and stacks up to 50. So you want to put him in high resistance. If you can get high damage, awesome, because he can do some damage on the A1 and on the A2 as well. So don't sleep on Drexthar. He could come into play here. Then we've got, what else here? The turn meter fill effects are 30% more effective on enemies under an entangle debuff if Leshun is under an HP burn debuff. Turn meter fill effects are 30% more effective on enemies under an entangle. All right, so that's good for ourselves, right? So we want to be able to speed up as much as possible so we can get rid of that entangle, as it says up here. So once you get your team to 100% turn meter, the ones that have the entangle, it gets removed. So that's not bad. You can only remove an entangle debuff by actively filling the champion's turn meter to 100%. So once you get to the 100% turn meter, you can remove that entangle debuff, which is nice. But in theory, it sounds easy, but of course in practice, we'll have to see how that works. Almighty immunity is the same. He can't be frozen, he can't be stunned, slept, provoked, block active. Okay, he can't get anything against him. Then Almighty persistence is the same. All turn meter reduction effects are decreased by 50%. Okay, so you can decrease turn meter, so that's good. The awakened weakness is always the same. Almighty strength damage from skills that scale on max HP, 5%. So you can bring in a Marius on this one. Damage from HP burn debuffs cannot exceed 1% of the max HP of the boss. All right, so seems like this boss is fairly straightforward. It's not as difficult as Amius was when he first came out in terms of reading the kit, because this is not a mythical boss, right? This is a normal boss, just a void legendary. Actually, all these bosses are normal bosses. They're not void legendaries. So you should be able to come in here and beat most of these bosses a lot easier than it would be for hard mode Amius when that first came out. And of course, obviously, with new content comes new struggles. So you're going to have to learn how to beat this boss over time anyways. But I think it'll still be much easier than Amius, in my personal opinion. You just have to have enough champions to do it. The downside is the system picks champions for you, so that's where it could become extremely challenging. So yeah, I mean, I love it. I love all the new bosses. I love all the different effects. It's going to be something that we have to look at all our champions. How are we going to synergize our champions together? What strategies are we going to put together in order to win against this content? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think of the bosses? Are you psyched? I'm pretty psyched. I'm super psyched, actually. And I can't wait to get my hands on Mercurial set and more relics on the account. Yeah, and I definitely want to get that new mythical champion eventually, too. Although his kit didn't sound amazing, I'm sure we'll be able to see him in game soon. That's going to be it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you stayed this long, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. And like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bells so you don't miss another upload. And I'll see you on a video soon. Take care.